Creating a sample pack business that generates millions of dollars is something that most music makers could only dream of. There have really only been a handful of these unicorn sample pack companies. But even if your goal is to just make a little side cash selling sample packs, you can still learn a lot from the people involved with these companies.
We probably all have something to offer in that world. That's why I'm so excited to talk about sample packs and what that can mean for producers who are looking to create ancillary income streams for their business.
Today, I'm chatting with one of our producers here at Dark Label who was closely involved with one of these wildly successful sample pack companies. His name is Jeff Duncan. Jeff is a two-time #1 Billboard charting record producer, songwriter, and sound designer based in Nashville, and he was part of the team over at That Sound, or I Want That Sound. They've been making world-class sample packs for over a decade and were ultimately acquired by Splice. In this interview, you'll learn about how winning sample pack ideas are created, why some sample packs still thrive in a saturated market, how Splice works with producers like you, and much more. Jeff also put together a really cool worksheet for you called Sample Pack Ideation, questions to ask yourself when designing a winning sample pack. I've included a link in the description so you can download that for free. Obviously, your background being in the sample pack world, that's what I wanted to chat about because That's how you and I met. And I was going to tell that quick little story, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So everybody at this point probably knows Make Pop Music, the YouTube channel and sample pack company, education company. That actually started as a different business. It was Austin Hull had some assets. I had some assets. We put them together. And one of those assets was a sample pack company called Woodshed Audio, which I bought from a friend here in Nashville who had built it, and it was doing cool, but he wanted to get out of it and started running that. And at the time you were at That Sound, which we'll talk about in a second. But there were these websites that would, I guess, buy our products and then sell them at mass for cheaper, or are they giving them away? I forgot, but some kind of illegal thing. And you had reached out to us and said, hey, this is happening to us here at That Sound. This particular website, I noticed some of your stuff was on there. Here's how to do these like takedowns or whatever. And so I really appreciated that because there wasn't any, you had no reason to do that outside of just, you thought it'd be a good thing to do. So that is originally how we met. And that was, probably 2016, maybe.
Years ago. A while ago now. Yeah.
And then we kind of linked back up here in the past few years. But let's talk about That Sound, because I think and for those that don't know, That Sound, I Want That Sound, killer sample pack company from a product standpoint and from a business standpoint. Very popular here everywhere, really, but came out of Nashville. Tell us about how you got involved with that.
Yeah. Okay. So that company was created by two producer music makers here in town, Paul Mabry, who's an Australian drummer and producer, songwriter, incredible musician, who I've actually known since 1992 when we were youngsters. And I met him in Western Australia when I was on tour out there. And then he went on to have an incredible career all over the place, and he's settled in Nashville and produced platinum records and Grammys and the whole thing. He's done awesome, and he's just got an incredible soul and sensitivity to music. But the drumming, the sounds, the tones, and the performance of what he just instinctively goes for, turns out people want that on their records a lot. And so he obviously works as a drummer and producer, but he also was like, how do we give people this? And he teamed up with my really good friend Dustin Burnett, who's an incredible producer and mix engineer and artist. He has a sync project called Zaid Wolf that's just massive. It's probably the biggest independent artist on the planet in terms of what it actually does, in terms of business. He's huge, and it's super inspiring guy. And we've been friends for a long time. We met at a writing camp, and we didn't write together, but we were just chatting in the lobby, and it was just like, what a legend. So we hung out, and we've become really good friends over the years. And we went to China together to play a show, and we've just hung out in New York and just gone on adventures together as friends, and it's awesome. And we worked together a bunch on music too. So they had made this company, and they had put out some sample packs. I think the first one was just Paul Mabry, Volume 1. And so I'd got it. And at that point, it was just samples and loops. There was no presets. There was no sort of DAW integration or anything like that. So, and I work in Logic. So I just grabbed all the one shots and made EXS24, which was the sampler in Logic back then. It's just called Sampler now, which is just so imaginative, but it says what it does, what it says. Anyway, so I made these presets and sent them over and said, listen, boys, take these and give them to your community if you want. This is how I find them really useful in Logic. And then they were like, oh, we don't know anything about this stuff. Can you help us make presets and make them usable for people? If that's because Dustin tends to just drag and drop audio on the grid in Pro Tools, and he's a master of that. He can do it like and stuff sounds awesome. So it was just a different way of utilizing it than what he was using. So yeah, I basically jumped on board and sort of took control of that piece of it, and was, we were doing Battery and Contact and Ableton and Logic and Reason and a bunch of these different formats, so that people could just jump in and use MIDI to create drum parts like what we do when we're using a sampler generally, you know what I mean? So and then just helped sort of with naming conventions and sort of some of the process part of it, which I'm fascinated by. I love technical processes, especially when they intersect with creative processes. That's always been something that invigorates my brain. So that's essentially how I jumped into that. And that was we just did that for years. And I started making packs that, I created the Cinematic Pop Library, and I mean a bunch of them, you know what I mean? So we started actually collaborating on the actual packs and the content as well. So it was a really fun season of just trying stuff and being creative and just trying to make stuff that was really useful. And, from those guys is really where I sort of got the mantra, which was their mantra too, of they're only going to put stuff out that they use every day themselves, that they're like, I couldn't make a record without this. So it's really sort of like highly curated, highly, bespoke to what they would do when making the records they want to make, and I think people really resonated with that. It's not like 50 gig of drum samples. It's like, here's 500 meg of awesome things in this vibe, and you're going to layer that snare with whatever. Like there's a Paul Mabry snare called Sizzle Bang. Everyone layers that with every snare if they want it to have that big explosive organic sound. Even behind electronic stuff, it's just magic snare sample, so stuff like that, just getting really excited about this is so usable. This is transforming what people can do as a home studio producer or mixer, because like recording those sounds is challenging. And we were working in like the big studios, Tracking Room, which is sadly no longer with us. It's like one of the last packs we did in Tracking Room. It's like that's I think apartments or something now. It's not even a studio, so. And then, Sound Emporium, and I mean a bunch of them, just great spaces with incredible gear, well maintained. And then with a drummer like Paul tuning them and hitting them so well, it's like they're absolutely magic sounds that you really can't hope to achieve in your home studio. You're never going to get it to sound like that. So when you can buy it for $30 and push it up in the mix behind whatever you're doing, and it's just money, it's like, yeah, really valuable to people. And that feels great, right? When you're really like, people are like, I can't believe how good my drums sound because of what you're giving us. And that's just so rewarding to be like a part of facilitating people hitting their goals and making the songs sound how they always hoped they could sound, but it was kind of out of reach.
They sound incredible. Yeah, that, because when I was still running the production team here, kind of in the era of those taking off, there were maybe still a little bit of a best kept secret thing, towards the earlier years of that company. And yeah, I mean, I think the first like sync placement we got, I'm sure that was all like that sound stuff. Most of the client work we were working on especially in that era, Christian Fiore was the main producer at that point. I don't know what he's using now, but during that period, all over the place, it was great stuff. And then what's cool about it, which I think a lot of people may not think about this when they get into creating a product or a sample pack or a line, is that this company ended up being acquired, right?
That's right. Yeah. So Splice sort of came on board and showed some interest in acquiring the company outright. So yeah, that deal happened, and so Dustin and Paul are no longer, principals or whatever. They're kind of out of it completely, really. And so that sound operates as a label within the Splice ecosystem, and a really good friend of mine is running that label for Splice. So I'm still making a bunch of drums and stuff that go out through Splice as part of that sound. So, it's been great, I think, for people to become more aware of those sounds just because Splice is so massive, and relatively cost effective, right? It's pretty cheap to just have access to all of that stuff. So the entire That Sound catalog is available on Splice, right? So
you want to explain real quick without, I know there's some stuff we can't talk about with payment structure and stuff, but just the concept of like the labels at Splice and what that is.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, if you use Splice, which I'm sure most of us have, you know that there's labels that sort of represent content into the genre that they're sort of affiliated with, which just helps people zero in on, like, Neon Wave makes, synthwave or whatever, and then you've got the Oliver stuff for the modern disco pop stuff, or what, they fall into these genres. So That Sound just exists as a label supporting primarily organic drums or tweaked organic drums. There's some synthetic stuff in there as well, obviously, but so you're it's able to compartmentalize it into genres just to help people kind of zero in on what they're looking for. So, and they operate basically as little mini labels within that structure. So they have their own branding aesthetic, and they, tend to focus on different styles of material, and so I think that just helps people sort of zero in quicker on what they're actually looking for. But it's also good as a content creator, because if you're talking with Neon Wave about making a pack, then you kind of know what it is they're looking for. It's going to be synthwave or retro wave or whatever, more in that sort of realm. So I've worked with a bunch of different labels over there, but still most of the work that I'm doing is directly for That Sound. So a lot of organic sort of pop, rock, indie, cinematic, whatever drums, But that's essentially how the labels work. They just kind of enable people to zero in on the vibe they're shooting for,
Hey everyone, quick interruption from me. This video is brought to you by us here at Dark Label Music. If you're a working producer who would like to explore management services or business consulting to help you grow, then there's a link to reach out to us in the description. We're happy to take a look at your situation. And for more in-depth producer business content, make sure to also check out our Music Pro Daily podcast, linked in the description as well. Now back to the video. If you were a producer approaching one of these labels, how would you best prepare for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we've talked about this a little bit just ourselves, like, how do you make a pack that's really going to be successful, and how do you envisage what that could be? And I think, like Paul and Dustin would always say, it's like, make stuff that's invaluable to you every day, because you want to find your own voice in that world, because we've all heard a million Fat Black Beauty snare drum samples. That's cool, but what can you bring that's really original to you, that's like, I don't have that, and it's epic and it's used all the time, like in my own work or whatever. So yeah, try and make something that's actually compelling, and not just, I'm just going to record a drum kit, because we've got that. We don't need any more sort of average drum kits or average loops. Just make stuff that's really going to help people push their music forward and be creative. And that takes work, you know what I mean? So really start with a concept that feels really strong. A lot of the packs on Splice are rooted around a core concept as well. So if you're like, oh, I make dirty disco pop or whatever, then, just think about how to really bring that kind of focus to a pack, so it's really delivering a thing. I think that can be cool. And then so you'd reach out, hit them up and say, hey, I've got some content, and it just has to be mind-blowingly good. It's like they hear so many submissions, there's so much stuff coming in, and in talking to those guys, some of it's just pretty average, and you probably wouldn't use it on your own. If it was on your record, you'd want to do it again, kind of thing. You know what I mean? I think just people think, oh, drum samples, I'm going to make some money, sweet. They'll take it and I'll get 1 million downloads and get paid. It's like, it has to be compelling at this point, because there's just so much stuff. So I think really if you're going to do it, I think you really want to take the time to figure out how to really make it compelling and incredible, so that people are actually really going to want it, and not just random people. Like, people who are making hit songs want stuff. So it's like, it really has to be at that level where it's competing with all you are, and you're literally competing with Oliver and all them dudes, like Kashmir and all that. You really got to make stuff that's incredible, you know what I mean? So, it's a great challenge, and I think it pushes people to dig in and figure out what they really love about, drums or synths or whatever. I mean, most of my stuff's in drums, so I sort of tend to think about it in those terms. But like, now it's like, man, I know exactly how to make snare drums thumpy or smacky or cracky, or kick drums knock or warm and tubby, or like whatever. You just learn all that stuff because you're making so much of it. So you really want to have a handle on just really making it sound incredible. And I'm not like, oh, I'm the best at that, but I do love that process. And I've heard a lot of guys out there that are mixing stuff that sounds incredible, far beyond my skills. So I'm sure the guys in these groups can figure that out and make it awesome. But yeah, really keeping the bar high and, delivering something that's really sort of compelling and usable and sort of original, or has a bent of like, oh yeah, I could really see people using this in their music, and really that's it, just make it awesome. Be creative, stuff that's useful.
When a producer's sending out some content to a label, are they sending just the individual samples? Like, here's what I've made, or like, because back in our day, it was all about the demo song to sell the
Right.
packs. Like when we were selling it from our own website. Is that how you present it to somebody? Like, hey, here's what this pack can create, and then if they want to go through the individual sounds, they can, or are they usually just sending the individual sounds? Like, what's your thought on that?
Well, so I mean, I haven't sort of been through the process of cold calling them, being like, here's what I'm doing, because I'm sort of came in through the side door, so to speak, you know what I mean? So they kind of know what I'm doing, and we sort of agree on a concept, and we sort of, sometimes I'll send them a playlist of stuff that feels like this kind of represents what I'm talking about. If you're interested in that, I'll go ahead and make it, you know what I mean? But if you were doing that, knocking on the front window, I suspect it would be like, make enough samples that they can kind of really hear the direction that you're going, and then make a killer demo song. Yeah. But maybe you're not sending off all 250 samples or whatever, you know what I mean? Maybe you haven't gone down to that degree yet, in terms of like, here's 10 or 15 or 20 just killer sounding samples, and maybe half of them are just loops, not just the samples. And then, a killer demo song that says, here's giving you the picture of the concept of how it would apply musically. Because I think the other thing is, I've had so many drums that I've like, what the heck is that sample? And then I've heard someone use a sample like that in a song, and I'm like, oh, that's the context in which that makes sense now, and then oh, okay, I'll use that. That's cool. I wouldn't have thought to use it like that. But I just, some of them, I had no context for what I would do with it. But then when you hear it, you're like, oh, that's cool. So yeah, I think contextualizing your ideas to say, oh yeah, that big clap verb goes on beat 4 before the down, whatever, I mean, just putting some context around it can help people zero in on what's useful. So I think making sure that when you're pitching it to a label, they're really getting the vision from you as to how you think it could be used creatively, or where it fits in music in general,
Also, like packs with a story, right? Like Hanger, going out, or there's a couple other sample pack companies that have done that, where there's kind of a story behind it,
And that's fun, right? It has a concept. I think, having a concept where it hinges on a concept where people can kind of get what it is you're going for is useful too. Because it's like a singular sample pack, I don't think needs to be everything to everybody. I think it's more useful to say, here's a highly curated little set of samples and loops and vibes that will help you do a certain kind of thing. And then here's another one that helps you do a different kind of certain thing, and I think having the restraint to not try and cover everything with every sample pack, because I just don't know if that's as useful as saying, here's some rad vibes in a little wedge of awesomeness, and here's another little wedge of awesomeness over here, you know what I mean? Sort of thematically related content that's like, here's a little bundle that'll help you make this thing, I think that's a vibe.
You said you've been working on a bunch of releases lately. Any sample packs outside of your own that you want to give some kudos to?
Oh man, well, there's a bunch of stuff coming out on that sound that's super rad. My buddy Pete Parada, who used to play drums for the Offspring and stuff like that, he's an incredible pop punk drummer. Well, he originally a proper punk drummer, but he plays on all sorts of stuff now, and he lives about 10 minutes from me. And he did a pack that's just absolute money. And since the pop punk thing has sort of had a massive reemergence, I mean, I think that's done pretty good on Splice, and his stuff always sounds incredible. So that's a kit that I really like. I did one recently called Wild Indie Pop that I feel like it's just stuff I'm using all day long when I'm doing sort of indie pop, sort of alt pop sort of stuff, and that's been going pretty good. So that's a lot of fun. My daughter is actually making a bunch of vocal packs for Splice. She's just graduated high school, so she's taking a gap year. So she's about to jump into making some vocal stuff, which I'll probably give her a bit of a hand with just at the end, but she's killer and she's got these cool ideas. So it's really fun seeing her sort of jump into that world and just get creative, So, and I think as producers, we probably all have something to offer in that world. That's why I'm so excited to talk about sample packs and what that can mean for producers who are looking to create ancillary income streams for their business. Because if you're a producer that's basically working as a producer, then clearly you're creative and capable and you have an understanding of what makes a song special. So trying to distill some of who you are as a creative into a sample pack that can facilitate other people creating songs that they couldn't have made without it. It's hugely rewarding, it's really cool.
Yeah. And I'm excited because we got a lot of content around that coming, that process.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm excited for, like one of the things we do here at Dark Labels, having people within the community create new projects and build things off the platform. And obviously it helps the other producers in the community, but also to the public, And I thought you'd be such a great guy for that, just with your background and how you think about designing products and creating them, because it is easy for, a producer to kind of just feel like, well, everything's been made already, and it's like, well, that's not true. You're not saying that about making songs, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So
I guess all the good songs already got written. I might as well go and work
right.
at a bank. You know what I mean? It's like, no.
Right. And I get it. But as just with anything, as things get more like saturated or whatever, of course, creativity has to increase. And that's good. That's called progress,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
I think it's where it becomes important for people's own identity to shine through more too, rather than, well, here's another Black Beauty. It's like, cool, but what do you want to make? You want to just record stock drum sounds? That's fine. And sometimes that Black Beauty sample is exactly what you need. But I think there is so much scope to create stuff that's original to you as a creator. That means you're really not competing with anyone because it's you bringing you, and like that. I remember for a long time, I think it's by Crane, Krane. There's like a bamboo snare sample. And for a long time, that was like the most downloaded sample like in the world, and it was just on everything. It just had this rad kind of snare sample thing that had a tone to it. And it was just really cool. And it's like, that's just one sound that just ended up becoming so ubiquitous. It's awesome because it just sounds so rad, you know what I mean? But it's not even like a Black Beauty or something that a traditionalist would be like, this is the holy grail, like, you know what I mean? It's just like, no, it's just inspiring in a song, so yeah, I really just, I think a huge piece of this is obviously there's processes and there's sort of some sort of vision for what it's going to be and some of that sort of stuff, but I think a huge piece of it is inviting people to bring themselves and really participating in it as what's the best idea I've got of what would I think is cool, and just sort of having the courage to do that. I think that's huge, whether as a songwriter, as a producer, as a sample maker, like I think that's going to be really important. Like, and we're all talking about AI right now, and one of the conversations I had the other day, and people are like, oh man, it's going to be stuffed. It's like, well, Midjourney has killed a certain element of the graphic design business, right? Because people want a simple little cover art shot. They just plug it into Midjourney and get that, and it's free. But no one's printing off images from Midjourney and putting them in a gallery for $100,000. Like, stuff of real artistic value that matters is not getting replaced by AI at this point anyway. And I think the same with songs. Like, if your music can be replicated by AI, then you're probably just not putting enough of yourself into it. Like, because if AI is an amalgamation of all the stuff and your stuff just fits so cleanly in the middle that you're out of a job, like the new Skrillex record couldn't be made by AI because it just doesn't sound like anything else. Like there's no way the algorithm could divert so far from the norm and end up where Skrillex is at. So it's like you just have to figure out how to really take your own art as far down the path of being true to who you are as you can. And I think that applies to songs and production and samples and all of it, So it's a really good challenge. Like you talk about the market being saturated, and then I guess the AI piece. It's like, I think these are all really good challenges to be like, well, let's really dig deep and get creative and really show up to ourselves as creators and try and make something compelling that we're like, yeah, I've really dug in and I made something special. I mean, that's a great goal in life in general,
What are some tips though you have because this could definitely come up in product design, right? For a sample pack, and oh gosh, like some fear around like, am I even going to be able to come up with an ID and looking at it objectively? Anything you have to say on that, or these little happy accidents that happen that inspire a pack, or do you do like research on it, or tell us a little bit about that creation process?
Yeah, well, for me, the first pack I did with that sound was called Cinematic Pop, and it was basically like I was just making these sounds every time I made a song, and I would set up a sample and send it to this channel and load the plugins every time. I'm like, dude, I'm doing this for every song. These big kind of, I love that vibe, you know, that sense of scale or whatever. So I started just printing some and then reusing them, because I'm like, I just keep making the same thing over and over again. I'm an idiot. Why am I spending all this time setting up very similar signal chains and routing from scratch every time I do this? And I'm like, I got to start doing this better. So it ended up that I had actually accumulated a bunch of these sounds, and then I think Dustin was just like, you should just turn some of these into a pack. They sound epic, you know what I mean? So, and that was like, oh yeah, and that's that. I use the stuff every day. This is me making sounds that I find myself wanting to use. And so if you're not pushing the boundaries into being like, oh, I really want to mess around, and you know, a lot of guys just drag and drop samples and they don't do anything with them, and it's just like, that's not actually invalid, but I think if you want to get into making sample packs and content, if all you do is use samples that other people made, then you probably need to evaluate, like, what are you trying to bring to the table? And so if you want to bring something to the table, then I think it takes a little more exploration to kind of arrive at the, you know, this is what it's going to be. Yeah. So to your question, it's like the process for me is like, what do I use? What do I not have that I kind of want, that I find myself reaching for, and how do I make that? And sometimes I'm like, I don't know how to make it. So I just try a bunch of different plugins or pitch stuff, or I mean, just experiment and just spend some time actually being creative from the point of view of the sound design aspect, you know? And so some of it for me is not just straight organic drums, but some of it is stuff that feels organic drums. But if I played you the original recording, you're like, oh man, it sounds nothing like the snare drum I recorded. You know, it's like getting used to being comfortable with just mangling and pitching and stretching and just not being precious about the process till you arrive at what it is you're looking for. So for me, it's like I throw paint at the wall. I, at this point, am relatively unafraid creatively just to try stuff, even if it's against the rules. And I, you know, I think for a lot of us, you know, fidelity and engineering quality is something that we all probably grew up respecting and thinking like that is the pinnacle. Like these, you know, Grammy winning records from the 90s that are so pristine and clean. It's like, that's just not what makes music have a vibe anymore. That's not what we don't, you know, we're not just looking for that pristine SSL thing anymore. It's like, we want vibe, we want grit, we want tangibility, we want flavor and emotion. And it doesn't really come from just the cleanest recording you can make anymore, I don't think, anyway. The stuff that I love is never, you know, it's all wavy or wobbly, or it's distorted, or it's darker than you think it should be, or it's combinations of things that are weird. I think it has to, modern music is just imbued with so much flavor and vibe, and people are like, all the songs are crap, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, man, I don't know. I think there's so much vibe. It's just not engineered, but like, it sounds terrible. It's not engineered well. It's like, it's just a different set of parameters of what makes music connect with people. Like, some of it's engineered really well and then deliberately just mangled so it has a vibe. You know what I mean? I think it's all just taste and sort of being unafraid and not sort of holding on, you know, just being a bit more freer with like, what could be cool? Oh, are you going to break that rule? Yeah, I mean, I think I probably will. You know what I mean? Like, I will break these rules. I will smash this with plugins until it sounds awesome. You know what I mean? And I think philosophically, that's something I'm really comfortable with. And for other people, that's something that's much newer to their way of thinking. Like, oh, but it'll sound wrong. Yeah, I mean, it might sound wrong. It might be perfect if it sounds completely wrong, you know? So for some people, that's more of a creative leap to make, you know, and for those people, they might not want to make that stuff. They might want to make real pristine things and find a way of creating value for people where that is the goal, you know? And I think it's like everyone just has to find what is true to them as a creator at some point and say, okay, what do I do that so that it really is authentic and rad and sounds incredible, in whatever lane is true to you, that you feel like other people would find this useful. You know what I mean? And it's finding that balance of, here's my authenticity and here's some commercial value, and finding a balance so that a pack can be creatively satisfying and useful to other people, make you the money that you want to make from it, and not be just utterly derivative, you know?
Yeah, I love that. I got a pro tip too for people that, because when guys are, you know, busy working, especially like client work or even cranking out sync stuff, like you could be like, well, I don't have time to sit here and like design a kick drum sound for every single song I'm working on.
Sure.
The guys on my production team, what they would do is, which is super simple, they would just have a time set aside. It's usually like Sundays, and that was just like sound design day. They dial in presets on like, you know, guitar plugins, like they just had go-tos for the week. They usually kind of knew what was up and coming that week. Go through sounds from other people, start organizing those that they might be using, and then do some of their own sort of sound design and just like have a little time, set aside for it. Because I do get also that when you're grinding and getting a bunch of tracks out for clients or catalog or whatever, it could be tough to sit there and spend 2 hours designing a sound,
Sure. Yeah.
Separate those times,
Totally. That makes sense. And I mean, that's great. That process that you're talking about is essentially what led to that first sample pack that I made, because I was going through and printing stuff and preparing stuff that I was doing. So you're right. If someone's spending some time every Sunday or whenever it is making a bunch of stuff they like, that's like, this is going to be useful to me, it's original sound design content, well, then you're already sort of in the process of doing that. And if you prepare it all and put it in folders and name it correctly and then normalize it and make sure the fades are clean and that it starts right on the front of it, then you're basically building a sample pack. So, if that's what people are doing, then you're kind of already on the path, which is great. I mean, that's awesome. And you're right. You don't always have time to sound design a kick or whatever like that. But I think, in every song, having some signature element that's like, oh, that's an original idea, like in terms of a sound or something. Like everyone has time to spend half an hour faffing around with a synth and tweaking it or a guitar hit and putting it into a super massive and then reversing it. I mean, we've all got time to make something unique and signature. And if we don't, we should, because otherwise every song sounds the same. And I don't think every song sounds the same as much as people think they do. There's a lot of commonality, and then there's something that's like, whoa, that was dope. And that might be the thing that grabbed the music supervisor's ear or whatever that got them the placement, So I think originality and still trying to find your own voice of expression is still super important in music, even though on the surface, a lot of stuff does sound similar at times, I think it's still really important.
Don't forget to download the worksheet Jeff created for you, Sample Pack Ideation, questions to ask yourself when designing a winning sample pack. Link is in the description below. And if you find these interviews valuable, then I recommend that you watch this next one with Hyperbits. Peace out.